A crowd of tourists was milling around Buckingham Palace. Everyone was filming with cameras, admiring the architecture, while security guard James Davis stood motionless like a statue. His red uniform glistened in the sun, and his gaze was forward, without emotion. His job was not just a duty, but a part of him. The silence around him was not silence, but a constant test. But today was different. A man in a dark hoodie with rough tattoos on his neck was approaching the guard. There was nothing innocent in his gaze. It was aggression, an intention to disrupt the order. He moved through the crowd, as if looking for a moment to get closer. His eyes never left James, as if challenging him to fight, to react. No one understood what was happening, but the atmosphere was getting more and more tense. The man stopped near the guard, came even closer, challenging him. This was the moment. James, unwavering as always, did not even move. Everyone around him watched as the conflict was on the verge of spiraling out of control. Well, there was only one thing in his eyes as a man, a test. And now there was only one question: who would defeat whom? The crowds outside Buckingham Palace are rarely quiet, but today was particularly loud. People bowed their heads, trying to capture the moment of the changing of the guard. James stood at his post, unmoving. His gaze was forward. He didn't notice anything but the straight line in front of him. He was perfectly prepared for this. Sometimes even thoughts did not enter his head, just stand there and fulfill his mission. The tourists were enthusiastically filming, waiting for the moment when the guard would change his position. But James was unmoved. It was his workday, and every movement, every step of the people around him had long since become part of the background. He never paid attention to provocations or minor troubles, because he knew that his place was here and now. But today he felt something special. Not far away, a group of tourists were laughing and taking pictures in front of the palace when a middle-aged man approached the crowd. He was not like the others. He was tall, with a red hoodie and black tattoos covering his neck and arms. His steps were decisive, and his every move seemed to be prepared. He seemed to know what he was doing. Everyone around him continued their usual rhythm, but the man somehow drew attention to himself too clearly. His gaze was directly on James, as if he was looking for some moment of weakness. He moved deeper into the crowd, moving at the level of the guard, and unlike the others, he did not stop. His movements were aggressive. His eyes were angry. That's it, right here and now, he thought. Of course, most tourists just laughed or chatted. But not this man. He was much more determined. As he approached James, the man lowered his voice a little so that everyone around him could hear his words. "What are you, Stone? Are you just standing there and not talking? Are you bored?" His voice broke through the noise. He was trying to draw attention to himself. James did not respond. He didn't say anything and didn't even move his gaze from where he was looking. The man, not getting a response, decided to get even closer. Step by step, he was standing just a few centimeters away from James, and everyone watching could tell that something was about to happen. The tourists stopped for a moment, and some of them were even afraid of what was happening. "Go ahead, show us what you can do. React at least somehow," he continued, smiling evilly, and stood close again. His arms were crossed over his chest, his gaze deepened into James, as if he was trying to detect some kind of weakness. James did not move. He didn't seem to see or hear him. All this time, standing there, he remembered his mission. He would not allow anyone to disturb the peace of this place, would not allow any provocation. But the man was not going to stop. His gaze became even angrier and his demeanor even more aggressive. Everyone around felt the change in the atmosphere. Suddenly, one of the tourists whispered excitedly, "He's going to do something now." All eyes were on the guard and the man. And there was no doubt about it. A tense battlefield had emerged between them. The man, focused on his goal, did not stop. He didn't react to his aggression becoming visible to others, as if he didn't care who was watching. His gaze, directed at James, resembled a predator closely watching its prey. He didn't care that there was a guard standing there, a symbol of the royal guard, performing his duties year after year without a single deviation. He wasn't looking for a simple provocative word. He was looking for a moment of weakness to violate the very idea of inviolability. "Well, aren't you going to say anything?" the man repeated, his voice louder now, with a subtle scorn. People began to watch more closely, interested in how the situation would develop. James stood there as usual and did not respond. He seemed to be disconnected from the outside world. But in reality, it was not like that at all. A cold fire was burning inside him. His heart was beating steadily, without unnecessary emotions. He felt every look, every step of this man coming at him. But he did not allow any of these feelings to break through the discipline that had kept him at his post for so long. He knew that when you give up, when you allow yourself to be broken, you lose everything. And today he was not going to let that happen. The man came even closer. He stood just a few centimeters away from James, as if testing his strength. Everyone around him held their breath. Tourists whispered, though many of them tried not to draw attention to themselves. Some were already pulling out their phones to film the scene, preparing for the next social media post. What? You don't know how to answer? The man came a few steps closer. He realized that no one could stand there for so long without reacting. He was counting on a reaction. Most guards are either confused or try to talk, or at least make a gesture to show that they hear but do not react. James, on the other hand, remained completely still. You probably think it's just a job, right? The man looked at him mockingly. You don't believe in any of this, do you? Real faith is for weaklings. James noticed the man glancing at his cross hanging below his uniform. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. A line was drawn between them that could not be reversed. He's definitely trying to test something more than just my endurance, James thought, trying to keep all emotions out of his mind. He couldn't afford to lose control. All those years of training, every day he spent at the post, were now in jeopardy. The tourists began whispering among themselves as they saw the atmosphere grow increasingly tense. And yet, even as the man provoked him to make direct contact, James remained just as steadfast. He knew he would have to pay for any weakness he showed. And so, the man took another step. He came so close that their bodies were almost in contact. Do you want to do this? Do you really want to keep this cross on you when I rip it from you? His voice became sharp again, mocking. James didn't move, but there was something in his eyes that left no doubt that he was ready. This man did not know who he was dealing with. Everyone was witnessing a moment when two worlds, the world behind discipline and duty and the one that challenged, met in an instant. And then, if it had happened anywhere else, it might have been just another one of those street fights. But here, outside Buckingham Palace, in this place where everything was subject to discipline and respect, the conflict took on a whole new dimension. The man continued to stand beside him, as if mocking James' stillness. His arms were once again crossed over his chest, and he looked at the guard with a smile so contemptuous that it seemed to summon a response. His voice, which at first had been only sharp, now almost poured out a poisonous stream. You don't want me to tell everyone what's really going on in these fairy tales, do you? He said, threatening him with a gesture that resembled an open provocation. If you still believe in this cross, then perhaps I will surprise you when I simply rip it off your neck. And then we'll see which of us has more courage. The air around them became thick. Everyone standing around seemed to be holding their breath, expecting that this was not just another attempt to disturb the peace, but something more, where not only the guard's patience but also his principles were at stake. Tourists tried to film the scene on their phones, some pulled their children to the side, not knowing how to react to this openly aggressive intrusion. James still stood in place. His gaze remained on the horizon, but there was more to his eyes than just cold and ruthless concentration. Anyone who was watching could see his fingers on the gun tighten slightly, as if ready to move at a moment's notice. His breathing remained steady and his heart was serenely calm, although inside he felt that this was more than just another test of endurance. It was a collision of two worlds. The man continued to smile, trying to detect even the slightest crack in the guard. But nothing happened. James stood as he was, not moving a finger. And then, as if on cue, the man made his next move. He pounced on the cross hanging under James' uniform. That's it, baby, he said almost gleefully, pulling the chain with the cross. And it was at that moment that it became clear that these were no longer just words. He was trying to tear off the very cross that James wore with pride, that had become part of him, part of his heritage. No, it was not just a chain. It was a symbol of loyalty, a symbol of the promise he had made to his brother. And this moment was more than just a mark of aggression for James. It was really personal. And it was at that very second, when the man was pulling the cross, that James decided that enough was enough. In one clear movement, he quickly raised his hand. He turned his body toward the man, calculating the exact angle. James' feet left the ground, and immediately, with incredible speed and accuracy, he delivered a kick so powerful that the man was unable to hold back and, with the speed of lightning, was on the ground. The blow to his ankle was so sharp that he felt a sharp, painful sensation. The man fell down. The sound of the blow was like thunder in the ears of the crowd. He tried to get up, waving his arms, looking for balance, but he was too immediately struck. James stood there, invisibly bigger than he was, holding the cross in his hands. He picked it up from the ground, and although his face remained cold, there was something more to the gesture and acknowledgement, a restoration, that he had resisted temptation. Everyone around him held their breath. They had witnessed not just a physical battle, but a clash of spirits. The crowd was silent, fascinated by what had just happened. Only the Jimenez returned to his post as if nothing had happened. The cross was back around his neck, and he stood there in his place, ready to continue his service as usual. The man had no more strength to get up. He felt not only pain in his legs, but also in his ego.